Weapon viability is arguably at its strongest peak in Splatoon 3. I've been watching a couple of tournaments over the past few weeks, trying to keep up with what is currently strong in Splatoon 3. There was something very noticeable across all the teams playing in those tournaments. Whether you were watching Dapple Productions 20XX League, Area Cup, or In the Zone 37, you were bound to see some uncommon weapon pick get a podium result for the tournaments I just mentioned. It's honestly been really interesting seeing this, and I wanted to share my thoughts on what weapons are arguably viable at this point in Splatoon 3's meta. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. I usually try to stay away from tier list related videos relating to competitive play because I'm not a top player, but I really wanted to share my thoughts because I believe I understand the game enough, and it's important for a lot of competitive players wanting to push into higher and top level to hear the advice I'm going to give in the video. Without wasting any more time, let's get started. Before I give my explanation as to why I think these weapons are viable, let me give a couple of disclaimers and criteria. First and foremost, this is a zones and tournament setting only. So I'm talking about from a point of view that you're using these weapons in a tournament and you're playing zones only. Not solo queue, so not your Anarchy or your X battles, tournaments. And at the end of the day, like if you don't see a weapon favorably ranked in this tier list, if you even want to call it a tier list, it's okay. Like I think all weapons can work in a solo queue environment, and I'm more interested in the competitive side of things because that's where a lot of theory crafting can happen. So play whatever you want. Number 2, there's a reason why there's so much weapon flexibility, and it's because of 2 core essential things to a team composition, and that's 1, having a blue pencil, and 2, having a strikes weapon. Let's talk about the easy one, blue pencil. You've probably heard these roles over your time playing Splatoon 1, Splatoon 2, or Splatoon 3. You have your slayers, you have your support, and you have your backline, right? Your slayers basically do all the aggression. They're the ones that primarily push in. Your support is basically how it sounds like. They support your teammates, whether it's with paint or with specials. And then you have your backlines, which basically act as the last line of defense and pressure from a distance. The thing about Pencil that it does exceptionally well is that it's able to fulfill 2 of those roles very, very comfortably. It supports your teammates very well, and it does a really good job as a backline. The reason it supports very well is because of its kit. You have this main weapon that already paints a lot. You pair it with Sprinkler, which paints in very unusual spots if you set it up correctly, and it has Tacticooler, which is able to enable teams to basically take risky plays and quicken the pace of the game, making it more likely for teams to go for very aggressive plays and not have to worry so much about the repercussions because Tacticooler gives you that quick respawn and the special saver effect. The reason it's such a good backline is because it has really good range, and it also actually does quite a bit of damage, which kind of relates to its support role as well. It does 68 damage, so it pairs a lot with other weapons, whether you're playing Sloshers, blasters, or playing with a burst bomb weapon. Like it combos incredibly well. And like I was saying, it has really long range, making it a weapon that's able to pressure from a distance, putting itself in positions where it's not easily killable and acting as a beacon for teammates to come back in and jump in. So that's the reason in a nutshell why blue pencil, in my opinion, is essential. It's able to do 2 things at once, freeing up a slot for your team. Because if we were playing something like Splatoon 2, for example, you would have your Slayer weapon with the K52, you would have your hybrid with the K-shot, you would have your N-zap, and you would have your Jet Squelcher at the end, right? Pencil basically combines the Jet Squelcher and the N-zap role as a visual idea of how to think about this. So because Pencil is able to consume 2 roles and make it into 1, it frees up another slot for another weapon to get the call up. So there's now more opportunities for other weapons to be like, okay, I wasn't the second weapon selected, but because of pencil, now I get to be the third weapon selected. So you'll sometimes see like very dedicated one-trick players get slotted into a team composition because they're like, yeah, we have a pencil player, and second, we have a strikes weapon player, which is the other core component as to what I think is allowing for weapon flexibility. So in this particular tier, I did order it. All the other tier is unordered, if I remember correctly. If I didn't, I'll correct myself later. But in my opinion, alongside the blue pencil, I think a strike weapon is very essential for a lot of reasons. I mean, strikes is arguably one of the stronger re-entry tools for allowing to push in. So like, it allows your teammates to push into particular areas because it forces the enemy to go back, and it allows your teammates to take up that space. And it also works as a really good re-entry tool when it comes to contesting the objective. Like, I don't know how many times I've played in a tournament in Robo Ramen zones, and I just see a bunch of strikes flying across the map, retaking and cheesing the zone. Like, I've seen it so many times to the point where I'm just like, yeah, strikes is really become essential for Splat Zones tournaments because of its retake possibilities and its entry possibilities. So the one that is the king of the mountain when it comes to these strikes weapons is Slosher. Like, Slosher just does so many things, especially in a fight heavy meta. It's just such a really good weapon to have if you have a bucket player on your team. It does 70 damage, it combos really well with the Splat Bomb, and it gets strikes pretty reasonably. Like, it's a 210 special now, but like if you pair it with comeback, and given how Slosher tends to go in a lot and die a lot, and because you have the tacticooler, you come back, and then you have the comeback effect on, allowing you to get the tri-strikes more easily. So it's kind of like a jack of all trades. Like, it does a lot for your team, and good Slosher players that are able to change up their playstyle mid-game, depending on what's going on in the game, can make so many team compositions thrive. Like, you can make so many weapons work around bucket and pencil, where you could chip with the bucket, you can support the bucket's aggression. Like, there's just so many different things you can pair with these two particular weapons. But let's say you're just not a bucket player. Well, you have your two shooters, which are also exceptionally well. So you have your Neo Splash, which arguably is not a fighter per se. Like, the main thing that Neo Splash does is, in a nutshell, paints, throws bombs, throws tri-strikes, rinse and repeat. It basically acts as a weapon that's meant to kind of like hold the zone, create entry for your teammates, and chip those when you have suction bombs available to you. Can the weapon fight? Of course it can. Like, anybody can make the weapon fight, but that's just not the job that you're going to be putting for it, right? Like a bucket, for example. But like, if you did want to have some fighting capabilities, then you would just trade in that shooter for the T-Tech, which is arguably a better fighting weapon. It's 180p, so it's a cheaper points for special, and has a Splat Bomb, which is a more aggressive sub compared to your suction bomb. These three, in my opinion, are really, really, really good when it comes to develop your team composition. I think if you're gonna consider a pencil, and if you have a bucket player or if you have a shooter player, make them play these weapons, because they're basically gonna give your other two weapons the maximum capability of allowing them to basically play the weapon that they're best at and is comfortable at fighting at this point in the meta. As for the last three, the reason I put them still here is because, in my opinion, you can still make them work. If you have a dedicated one-trick weapon or one-trick player of these weapons, you can make it work. And that's the whole point of what I'm trying to get across with weapon viability. Right now in Splatoon 3 is the best time to play and try various weapons. And the reason because of that is because pencil or blue pencil and strikes is able to enable you so much. So I still put these three here, even though they're not as good as the first three, I still think they're very good. As for their next tier, this is what I call +2 try them. In my opinion, all these weapons listed here are all arguably viable to play alongside the blue pencil and the strike weapon. Preferably if you use the first 3. The last 3 you can still make them work, like I said. But the reason I think all of these are really good to try in a team setting is because they're all able to comfortably fight, which is what this whole meta is set around. Because Tacticooler is so popular, set by the king, blue pencil, you're gonna want to have weapons that fight exceptionally well. And all of these weapons do that to some degree. Some better than others, but they're still able to fight. And that's what I mean. They're capable of fighting, especially in the right hands. Like, I think a good example would be like the first 3. Sploosh, it's not your long range weapon, but in the hands of someone like Jeff, could honestly, with the right comp, make it work. Junior, in the hands of Tiddly, for example, alongside a pencil and a strikes weapon, can make it work. As for C Junior, what I like about C Junior is the fact that in a meta where some players are now bringing in sharking weapons like Roller, for example, or Octobrush, having a kit like Torpedo and Wavebreaker to identify those players, I think will be really good. And I'll explain what I mean, like people are now sharking more when I get to Roller. But even though some people might say like these 3 weapons suck, in the right hands, you can make it work. They might be on the bottom edge of what I would consider like really, really strong fighters, but there's still weapons that you should try and make a comp, you know, try to make it work. You never know what's gonna happen. For Splash, Splash is the interesting thing because if you have another Splash, particularly the Neo, it might not work, but like for example, if you put Splash, Bucket, and a pencil, blue pencil, you have now a very chip heavy comp. And if you pair it with something like a range blaster or even like a blaster, you now have a comp that focuses a lot on chip damage because it has the burst bomb, and you have something that focuses on heavy fights, and you have a really good special with the crab tank. So like I said, you can make it work. Experiment. Shot is just your basic all-around weapon. It's like Mario and Smash. It never goes out of fashion. Like, you can still make it work. Obviously, a lot of shot players have now transitioned to, you know, playing Neo Splash. But like, if you're playing in a team composition and you have a shot, you have a Neo Splash, you have a pencil, you put in another weapon that's able to cover the weaknesses of these 2 short-range shooters, maybe like a midline, you can make it work. Like, Trizuka, as much as it's gotten nerfed, it's probably never going to go out of fashion. It'll still be incredibly strong. Going to the 52 gals, these are just very self-sufficient weapons where they don't need a lot of help and they could slot into a team composition and it can do its job exceptionally well. Would it be nice having certain weapons with it? Of course. Like, an example of a comp that you would probably pair this weapon with would be probably with the Neo Splash, because 52 gal kills incredibly fast. Imagine this weapon just being really close to you and the Neo Splash is just throwing tri-strikes in your general area to allow you to push in to make those aggressive plays, and you set up wall. It creates an annoyance for midline weapons that are really popular right now. So 52 is able to do a lot of things aggressively, and that's what I think makes it really good. 52 gal Deco, I think it's just a good weapon on certain maps. Like, I think Screen is really good on Umami zones, for example, and it's a good way to counter pencils line of sight. There are some pencil players that are just still good and they still hit you behind the screen, but I think 52 gal, given the main weapon, how self-sufficient it is, that's what I really like about this weapon. The Forge, it has been unproven. Like, no one has pushed this weapon, but I could honestly see a one-trick player pushing this and it making it work. You would just have to find the right weapon in this tier right here to make this one work. The only struggle I would see with this weapon is that it has Booyah Bomb alongside a retake special. Like, if you already have a comfortable retake special, the Booyah Bomb is kind of like fluff, like it's extra. So you might be thinking like, oh, we already have enough re-entry with like a Splash Neo that's like spamming 8 tri-strikes in a game. Or I could just put another strike weapon, like I could put Bucket and I could put Splash Neo, making the Forge irrelevant. But like I said, the whole point of this tier list is to say like you can make it work if you have a dedicated player to this weapon. The 96 scale Deco, it's kind of the same thing with this one in that it has a splash wall. It's really good at mitigating the mid lines that are strong right now. And Kraken, while it's not the beast that it was back then, it's still a good tool to force people to move back away from the objective, the zones. So people can make it work. When it comes to the blasters, the thing that makes blasters work per se is that there are 2 weapons up here that do exceptionally well with chip damage. So like you have your Pencil 68, you have the Slosher 70, and even though you don't have the chip damage with these 2, right, with the Splash Neo and the T-Tech, you still have weapons that paint incredibly well. And what do blasters love when people do? Paint for them, because blasters are unable to do that. So even though Luna Blaster hasn't been proven at top level, like you still have like very dedicated players like Acing still pushing this weapon, making it work. And you know, with the right comp, they could probably push it a lot further, I should say. The regular blaster, you have players like Len just showcasing the possibility of this weapon. Bubbler is just really good right now, so having that tool to give you re-entry is good, especially against comps that are very fight heavy and short range. The only thing that struggles, or this weapon struggles with, is that strikes are very popular, so it shreds the bubble. But during times where you're facing like a Zuka weapon, or you're fighting against Pencil and you want to push in and you don't want to risk getting killed from a distance, the bubbler is a really nice way to protect your teammates. A lot of people don't think Custom Blaster is good. I just think it's good in a game when you're playing against weapons like Roller and Brush that tend to shark a lot and you have the point sensor to be there. It's a very selfish weapon where it's not like you're not going to be telling your teammate, oh, charge up your splashdown like you would tell your Bucket player or your Splash Neo player to create a re-entry. Like, this weapon can use its special selfishly, and when you have 2 other weapons that are reliable when it comes to their special output, you could probably make this one work if you pair it up with another good weapon from this tier. Range Blaster is just a really good solid midline right now. What more is to say about this weapon than pairing it with like a Blue Pencil, a Bucket, range, and probably like a Splash. Very chip heavy, very midline heavy in maintaining people from a distance and killing them from a distance. Both of these are really good. Like, I think you could honestly make them work. Like, you have Gray showcasing the potential of this one, and you have like Urza showcasing the potential of this one. Rapid Blaster Deco is a little bit interesting because it has Inkjet, which is arguably a good special, but during a time where Pencil is incredibly popular, which has a very huge hitbox, and it's able to hit Inkjets very easily off the ground, and there's a lot of mid-range weapons that you might come across, like you might come across a Bucket, you might come across range, you might come across like Nautilus or weapons that are able to comfortably take them down. You're probably going to struggle. But I think what I like about this weapon, it chips very well, and it has Torpedo, which is able to call out sharking players. S-Blast is a bit unproven. There's not a lot of S-Blast representation, but I remember fighting against a player called Cats, and they showed that it was able to work. So like, I think this one more than this one, because this one has the Burst Bomb, so it combos well with like Pencil. But it has the same issue that I talked about with the Forge, like the Booyah Bomb and replicating that identity of the strikes. So, but I still think you can make it work. As for the L3s, they're just weapons that paint incredibly well and have something in their kit that might enable the other team or other teammates on your team. So like, this one has Crab Tank, it farms Crab Tank very well, and this one has Burst Bomb, and even though it has Hammer, as long as you have your cooler weapon with your blue pencil and your strikes weapon, you could have a throwaway special. Like you could have you could have a hammer. Like if you could slot in a reef slider, you could slot in a hammer, I think. Like I said, these two are probably, I would say, on the lower side of try them, but still try them. Like, you never know. Don't rule them out. H3 is a little bit harder, but I put it here because it simply has a wall and it has bubbler, which I think is good right now. The only thing that really holds this weapon back is that it's a very fast-paced game, and for a weapon that requires a lot of precision, it might not be able to keep up. But in the right hands, I wouldn't be surprised if H3D makes some waves. There's some weapons in here that I thought were never gonna do good, like Roller and Dapples, and I was proven wrong. So I'm putting it here because there might be a day where I get proven wrong by this weapon. Squeezer is a little bit hard right now. Like there's a lot of notable top players that drop this weapon. The ones that come to my head are like Atomic and Dylan. They're not playing the weapon a lot, probably because of the nerfs that happened to the weapon. Like they were pretty harsh in my opinion. But arguably it did allow a lot of weapons to start seeing use. A lot of the weapons that had like favorable matchups to can now come out of the woodworks and start playing and be slot in. So like that actually might be another reason why we're starting to see a lot of weapon viability. Like Squeezer has played a role in like gatekeeping in a way. But I still think if you're a dedicated Squeezer player, like you can make both of these work. These next three are basically the epitome of sharking weapons. Carbon Roller, you might be surprised, like you might have thought like, oh my god, that weapon is so bad. Autobomb Zipcaster. I'm just putting it here because it won something in Area Cup a few months ago, so it has been tested, it has been proven, it works. Carbon Deco and Roller basically have the identity of being your sharking weapons that you can create entry for with your strikes and with your pencil. So Carbon Deco, you see players like Volti doing incredibly well with it. It has Burst Bomb, it chips incredibly well with other weapons, buckets, blasters, you name it. And then you have like Roller, which if I'm being completely honest and transparent, if you were to ask me 4 months ago about my opinion on Roller's viability in a meta, I would have not probably put it up here. But the fact that Atomic, alongside other players where they used Roller, Neo Splash, 52 Gal, and Pencil, were able to make it work, it really shows like if you find the right team composition and the right players, you can make the majority of these weapons in this tier work. And the reason I think this weapon works is that it's able to capitalize on a lot of sharking possibilities where, because Tacticooler incentivizes a very fast and aggressive play, having a Roller player that's very patient, doesn't have to paint for itself as much because you have your strikes and your pencil player putting a lot of paint output, and pairing this weapon with like Ninja Squid or just swimming very carefully and going up to the enemy team and killing them, it could be probably one of the most tilting experiences ever. Like, in my opinion, Roller is one of the most irritating weapons to play against, especially when you play a very good Roller. So, and also it has Bubbler. Like, Bubbler is also really good. Like, you never know when a Roller might just pop out of the ink, kill you, pop up a Bubbler, and then create an entry tool for your team. So that's why I think Roller has really, I would say it has had the glow up of the year for Splatoon 3. As for the Flingzas, this one's a bit untested, foil Flingza, but I think highly of this one, the red one. Tenta missiles are just really good because like you have this annoying playstyle with the Roller, and like with the Octobrush, which I'll talk about in a little bit, you have this very shark heavy playstyle, and Flingza, in my opinion, is arguably the strongest ranked Tenta missile weapon, so this is why I'm putting it here. Like, you put this in the right team composition, I think it's done well in Area Cup. I'm pretty sure they got a podium result with a Flingza. That's also the same tournament that a Dapples got a podium result at Area Cup, so you can make it work. For the brushes, particularly the 2 ink brushes, when you give it Tacticooler, you give it quick respawn, so you give it the capabilities of it doing very annoying things without much repercussions. Like, imagine seeing a ink brush, a Tetra, a Slosher, and a pencil in the team composition. Like, you have 2 weapons that are mainly trying to flank. You have a weapon here that does good chip damage, allowing for easier kills for the brush and the Tetra. And you have a pencil that's able to give the Tacticooler to the brush to do its annoying things. If you have a dedicated brush player, I wouldn't be surprised if you see it doing well. Octobrush, there's not a lot of play. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Duck Motif is a team that uses Octobrush every now and then. I'm not sure if Red Shell still uses it very commonly, but if we're talking about from a high level and top level competitive setting, like, you can make this work. Like, you can make it work in mid level too. You can make it work in low level as well. It's just a very sharky weapon that kind of matches the identity of this weapon. Like, it's not Bubbler, but it's still Zipcaster, and Zipcaster, in my opinion, is still good. Especially when you're trying to take out these pesky pencils, Zipcaster can be a nuisance to play against. The Nouveau one is a bit untested, but I put it here because I think it has some very niche picks in like Flounder zones, because it has Beacon and it has Rain, which are really good re-entry tools, and Beacons are really strong on Flounder. Paintbrush, untested, but I'm willing to say give them a try. You never know. It does pretty good chip damage, so I wouldn't be surprised if someone pairs it with another chip-heavy comp. I will say I think Paintbrush is a little bit on the lower end of prioritizing which weapons you should probably try from here, but I would not be surprised if someone does well with this randomly in Area Cup or in another tournament. Bamboozler, you might be wondering, like, why pair it with a pencil that's also a charger? In my opinion, this charger is not really a charger. Like, it's not your stereotypical hold down one charge and you get one chop type of thing. Like, it has multiple shots, which a Bamboozler also does, and it does incredible chip damage. So if you focus on like a very chip heavy team composition, who is to say you can't make the Bamboozler work? Like, I think I'm a believer of this weapon in particular because of like teams like Healthy Diet. They have a Bamboozler on their team. I think it's a Blofer who plays the bamboo, and they've done well in a couple of tournaments. Or maybe if pencil is not an option, you could slot this one in. Actually, I would probably move this one down to like alternative backlines if you don't want to use a blue pencil, which I'll talk about later. But I guess I'll just keep it here for now. But just a mental note, this one could be your alternative backline to this. Okay, moving to the buckets. Buckets are just so easy to slot into a team composition. The only struggle with this is that you also have this one here. Like, if you are a bucket player, you're probably being asked, unless you're like a one trick of one of these buckets, you're probably being asked to play this one. I know that from experience because I usually play Slosher, Try, and Machine, and I kind of just swap to whichever one is really good. And this one just happens to be really good right now. So if you're a Slosher Deco player, a Try player, a Machine player, a Blob player, you might play Slosher, but let's go over each one. Let's say you put like a Neo Splash or a T-Tech instead of a Slosher. You could definitely make this weapon work. The only thing that will suck with Slosher Deco is that you're going to be losing the bomb. You're going to have a marker or the angle shooter. But Zipcaster is incredibly strong because it's able to get rid of those pesky pencils. But this one's a little bit harder because if you know how to play this one, you probably know how to play the regular Slosher. So you might as well just play the more comfortable pick. But if you want to try it, who is to say you can't, you know? The regular try, I think because this is a very shark heavy weapon, that's why I'm putting here. Like, you've seen players like Aloha do really well with it, and if we're giving a leg up to Roller and Octobrush, Try deserves that too. The only thing that Try really struggles with is that it doesn't have a pokeable bomb to give it entry. Like, at least Roller has a curling bomb to help it with its movement, and Octobrush has a suction bomb to stall. This one has Toxic Mist, which has more affinity with, or it has a better usage in things like Rainmaker, and since we're talking about zones only, you might not want to use the Try. And it has Inkjet, which also struggles against Pencil, but it's a good sharking weapon that punishes a lot of short-range weapons. So like if you ever come across a team composition that's heavily stacked on like Neo Splash, Shot, 52, like I can see Try doing really well. Machine isn't what it used to be, but it's kind of the same thing like I said with Slosher Deco. Like if you know these two weapons, play the regular Slosher. But I think if you have like a T-Tech, Neo Splash even, Machine pairs incredibly well with Pencil because Machine has a indirect damage of around, I want to say 35, 37. Actually, I think, yeah, I want to say it's like around there. So it would combo with the maximum of 68 with the Pencil, and most likely you're trying to hit directs, which is around 70, so it still combos with the Pencil. I think the V Machine right now has an edge over the Neo Machine because it has Fizzy Bomb. The only thing that sucks is, like I said, with the Forge and with the S-Blast, the purple one, is it has Booyah Bomb, replicating kind of like the Strike's identity of a re-entry. But Fizzy Bomb is just really good. Like, it pokes well, it paints well, and in a mode like Zones, you're gonna want to have things that paint. Neo Machine, it has Zuka, and Zuka, like, the reason you play Neo Machine is not for Zuka by itself. Like, if you play Zuka, you would probably play like Shot, but Neo Machine is just a good alternative for bucket players. Like, let's say you're playing a Roller, you're playing an Octobrush, you could have a Neo Machine and you could swap off and you could use point sensors to basically keep track of those enemies. May it always work? Probably not, but it's an alternative. Like, it's the idea of like your compositions have a lot of tools that you could potentially use, and if you already have like a dedicated bucket player, you could switch to a Neo Machine and you could just slot in the shooter player that could play the Tri-Strikes weapon. So that's what I mean. Like, there's so many different ways you can go about it. As long as you stick within these two bounds, you can make so many different things work. Blob is interesting because you have like this heavy paint weapon. There's nothing more annoying than playing against a team composition that doesn't interact and they're just painting. And Neo Splash is basically the example of that type of weapon that goes in those team compositions. So I could see this working. Like, after fighting like good blob players like Nico Chico, I wouldn't be surprised if this pops off one day. Dread is really interesting, unlike the other bucket weapons. The thing about Dread is that, unlike, let's say for example, like pairing bucket and machine is so awkward it doesn't work, but when you pair it with Dread, it actually works. Like, if you could pair Dread with machine, Dread with Try, Dread with Slosher, and that's because Dread is able to switch up on what it's able to do in a match. Like, it's able to paint, so it's able to support, and it's able to do a lot of damage because it does 90 damage, and it has a Reef Slider, which is really good for zones because it has some cheese capabilities, especially when you pair it up with the Strikes weapon. Like, the most recent in the zone tournament was won by Pencil, 52 Gal, Slosher, and Dreadringer. So it's definitely doable because, like I said, you had your Pencil and you had your Strikes weapon. You put this one in, it combos well with the Slosher, it combos well with the Pencil, and it's able to switch up and do different things depending on the situations happening in the map. So that flexibility that Dread has makes it very flexible for this meta where you're able to slot in 2 weapons as long as you follow these 2. As for the Splatlings, I don't really have a lot to say on these. Mini, burst bomb, chip damage, right? But you have Zinc Mini, which is becoming a little bit more popular nowadays because of the bubbler. It's just a very high mobile weapon that does a lot. And having that bubbler as a consistent re-entry tool for your team is really good. I think Nautilus, both of the Nautilus and the Edit, are just really good weapon at keeping like those players that tend to like move in incredibly fast and punishing them for coming in, because these weapons shred you incredibly fast. Like the bullet velocity of these weapons is really fast. So fighting against team compositions that are very short range but aggressive heavy, these weapons are able to like punish those type of playstyles. Dualies are interesting because the one that's mainly played is this one, the regular dualie, and for good reason. Like, it fights incredibly well, it has a good bomb, it has crab tank, which allows it to make aggressive plays but also defend the zone pretty competently by itself if it needs to. And because Zuka is not as popular and Inkjet is not as popular, you're basically removing a lot of the specials that used to basically crush it back in the day. It's still possible to run into those specials, of course, but I think that's why Dualie has seen quite a rise. It's a really good fighter. As for Dapples, Dapples is that one weapon that it's incredibly annoying to fight against. It has these weapon attributes that are very annoying, very fast, very quick. It's a lightweight weapon. The end parries is a little bit different, but like I said, as long as you follow your traditional pencil and strikes, you can make it work. Gluga and CDS are a bit unproven, but I think what makes these weapons interesting is that if you focus on like a very paint heavy composition, like you could allow Gluga to thrive because they won't have one of their weaknesses like in their face. And Dualies, I think the Wavebreaker one is really good, especially right now. Wavebreaker is probably going to be a good way to keep sharking weapons in check. And Tetras is probably one of those weapons that I'm not sure why people are not playing as much. I think Tetras just requires a lot of dedication. Like, it really does require you to one-trick it. But like in a meta that is very very fight heavy, you would think like this type of weapon would be really good right now. But I think both of them are really good. Like, as long as you have your weapons up here, like I keep saying, you'll be fine. And then Dowsers, Dowsers just wouldn't work if like you have this Dowser in the team, right? Same thing with the Brella, it wouldn't work here. Brella just suffers a lot from like lag, and so that's probably why people won't play it. And Inkjet's just not as good when Pencil's alive, and other midlines are popular. Tent is just kind of the same thing. It has some lag issues, but if you have like a really good Tent player, makes it work. The little bow, I put it here just because it has missiles, if I'm being honest with you. That's mainly it. And then all the swords, they fight incredibly well. They are able to pair with so many different weapons because they all do incredible chip damage. And they all play a little bit differently. Like, this one holds the midline and it's able to push into the front line very easily with its kit. This one's a little bit different, obviously, because it has crab tank, so it's a little bit far back. These two play a lot differently as well, but like I've seen Lemon use Wiper in high level and top level tournaments and perform well. So that's the reason I'm putting it here. And then Decav, I think this one is better because this one has Inkjet and it's not as good. But like we see players like Omega with Moonlight doing really well with it, and it pairs incredibly well. Like I said, I think Moonlight's comp was like Decav, Neo Splash, Pencil, and +1. So you can make it work because it's able to give you this weapon the paint, which it direly needs to get up close so it could get those lunge shots in. So yeah, in my opinion, all these weapons like right here, you should be trying out. You should have a pencil because it's going to give you the most weapon flexibility as to what you can slot in. And strikes are just the best re-entry and entry tool for you to have in your special compositions. It's just the best thing that you could put in alongside a pencil because it solves a lot of your problems when you're playing in a tournament and the teammates know how to fight against you. But let's say you don't want to play these weapons. Actually, before I get there, because there's the backlines and there's the coolers. You might be wondering why there's some weapons that are not listed in here. Like you might have noticed. I call this tier reconsider what you're doing. I'm not saying these weapons are bad. Like I think the one outlier is Squiffer. Like I think Squiffer's really good. It's just that with pencil being here, I don't know how Squiffer works. The core elements or the core trend of all these weapons in this tier is just that they don't fight well. They don't have a lot of fighting capabilities that make them very comfortable, reliable fighters in this heavy fighting meta that revolves around Tacticooler. Like, this kid is arguably one of the worst in the game. Aerospray is just a painting weapon, and if you want a painting weapon, just play this one. NZAP is a little bit weird. I'd actually say NZAP might be worth trying because I like Chump. So actually, let's put this one up here. I think that one actually might be worth it. And then you have this one is just that it has a better kit. This one has a better kit, so don't play these. Play these up here. And these two are they're just not fighting as comfortably. Same thing with the Clash. This one suffers from, it has a better kit. Go Dynamo. If you want to play Chumps, just play the orange Zap. Swigs they just don't fight well. Squiffer, like I said, it has the double charger problem. Squiffer just requires a lot of precision, which, unlike Bamboozler, isn't that big of a deal. And then you have your Dread Deed, which I would just say play the regular one. These weapons just struggle fighting a lot because they have very inconsistent damages on players. And then you have your Little Bow, which I don't know what to tell you about that kit, to be honest. But let's say you're in the opinion of, I don't want to play pencil. Or I don't want to get a pencil player. Okay, because you're doing that, you're now separating this one weapon that you could just easily put up here. And you're basically separating them into two tiers that you now have to consider. So with pencil, you could just pick this weapon and you could be like, okay, now just pick a strike weapon, and now I have this flexibility to pick from all of these weapons here. If you put yourself in the position where you pick another cooler weapon, you have to pick another backline, and because of that, this list right here shrinks. So that's why I think blue pencil is essential, because it basically just makes it easier for you to develop your team composition and theorize what's going to work. So once you go with no pencil, you basically run into the dilemma of like, okay, which cooler weapon am I going to run and why? And which backline is the best one to pair with that one? And then now, because we chose these particular weapons, what is our weapon pool going to look like? Who am I going to be able to play with? What weapons am I going to be able to slot in? It gets a lot shorter. I'm not saying it's bad. Like, you could definitely pair red pencil and Zap and put like a bucket and a 52 gal. That would be fine. Like, these two weapons pair incredibly well. But like, if you know how to play red pencil, play blue pencil, giving your other three teammates more flexibility as to what they can play. But if you don't want to go down that rabbit hole of what we've been talking about for like the last 40 minutes, in my opinion, these are the cooler weapons you should prioritize in order. Zap is just the second best cooler weapon that you're able to develop weapon comps around. Edit, unfortunately, because of the nerf that it got, it just makes backlist comps a little bit more harder. So cooler is just really important, and when you're fighting against another team that has a pencil and they're just pumping out coolers left and right, but you're not able to keep up because your edit is slower at painting now and it's not able to get its special as often, you're just gonna struggle with being overran by the constant cooler pressure from the enemy team. It's the same thing with the Slosher Nouveau. Like, it sucks me putting this weapon here because it's one of my favorite ones, but it having a 210p special just completely makes weapons outside of pencil comp so hard. I think if you were to use Slosher Nouveau, you would just use it on maps where pencil is not good and you still want to keep a cooler weapon. So like Flounder Zones is like the perfect example of when you would take out the blue pencil and slot the Slosher Nouveau in, and then your other 3 weapons would be entirely different. You would probably put another backline in there, and then you would put 2 other weapons from a smaller list from here. Dynamo works on Flounder, so like if you don't want to use Nouveau, you can use this one. This one is just really hard to use, but same thing, Flounder. And then this one is kind of like the same problem I said with H3D at the top. It's just very slow and a very fast-paced meta. So like if you're not going to have a pencil, kind of probably go with this order, in my opinion. And then after you pick one of these cooler weapons, then you kind of have to figure out, okay, well, what pairs with what? As for the backlines, this one's kind of ordered, but if you don't play blue pencil, you'll probably play red pencil. And if you don't play red pencil, you'll probably play Rapid Blaster Pro Deco, which is really good. Like I've seen Gray, and I believe I've seen Basil use it a couple of times. Ballpoint is not as good because Inkjet is just not as good as I said. And then Erito has been using a lot of bows, so this one works. I think after this, it just suffers from the problem of you're competing against Pencil, and Pencil outclasses you incredibly well, so why would you pick these? That's basically the idea. But in a nutshell, in my opinion, if you pick this one, and if you pick primarily one of these top 3, you have all this opportunity to pick from this. Like, you have so many tools in your toolbox that you could potentially slot in your team and make it work, because the game is at a point in its life cycle where there's so many weapons that can work. And even though backlines unfortunately get the short end of the stick because front lines are able to eat up so much, Pencil is just basically allowing more weapons to be played at the expense of the backline weapons. At the end of the day, the message I'm trying to get across is you have so many things you can try, and at the end of the day, what do you have to lose trying these things out? You're playing your game that you really enjoy, playing new things, and learning something at the end of the day. It honestly sounds like a win-win to me. But yeah, let me know what you guys think, and if you have any questions, let me know in the comments.